Hi, I'm Susie Miller. I'm Vivian Pullman-Shea's sister, and I like to bake bread. So this is the easiest bread recipe that I've found. It's very slightly adapted from the cast iron cookbook from America's Test Kitchen. So you can find the basic recipe there, but I find it's always easier to do things if somebody shows me how to do it. So today I'm going to show you how to do it. This recipe is different than many in that you actually bake the bread in a cast iron pot. So this first part of the video is going to show you how to make the dough. This is what's generally called a no-knead or a low-knead dough, because we are actually not going to do this in a like stand mixer with a kneading hook or anything like that. We're just going to mix the bread up by hand, let it sit for anywhere between 8 and 18 hours in a nice, stable, warm place. And then in the second part of the video, we'll show you how to shape it and how to bake it off. If you want the written directions for this, if you are friends with Suzanne Miller, I think I made the notes public. My notes section actually has my version of this recipe on it on Facebook. All right, so here we go. So I use a scale. I weigh the flour. That gives you a much more consistent baking. Humidity changes and all that can affect volume. So first thing is get your mixing bowl, put it on there, and do what's called zeroing it out. So you basically push the button so that it turns on, and that this is actually now zero weight as far as the weighing balance is concerned. For flavor, we put in a little bit of white whole wheat flour. White whole wheat flour is a type of flour that's a white wheat. If you just get regular whole wheat flour, that's red wheat. It's a little darker, has a little different flavor. My dad likes the flavor that this adds. Some people also use rye flour in this step. I put 2 ounces, and I'm just watching the scale. I put 2 ounces of the wheat flour or the rye flour, depending on who I'm making it for. Okay, there's 2 ounces of that. And then 13 ounces of bread flour. So you could make this with all bread flour, in which case you would use 15 ounces. So we just get that up to 15 ounces. And I sort of remember, I think it's 3.5 cups is what it is by volume, but I like to weigh it. All right, so we get the flour in. We also need salt. We need 1.5 teaspoons of salt. I tend to use sea salt, but the more fine-grained sea salt. And 1.5. And we then are going to also need yeast. This recipe calls for rapid rise yeast, and I either use that or cake yeast, which is hard to find. But one of my adaptations is I find that I want a little more yeast than the original recipe calls for. So I usually use 2 teaspoons of yeast instead of 1. And that'll leave a little bit for the next time. So usually these have 2.5, 2.25 teaspoons. So I save that for later. Okay, so then we're going to take, sorry, I forgot a fork. So you can use a whisk, but I just generally use a fork to mix all the flours together and to mix the salt and the yeast in there. Okay? And at this point, we can put the scale away because now we're going to go to volume. So for the wet ingredients, we need 200 milliliters of water. So we actually are, oops, sorry, that side. So we're going metric on you. And we use beer. So we have 50 milliliters of beer that we add to the water. I add it to the water because look at how it's not foaming like beer normally does. If you add it to the water like this, it won't foam up. So, and you can see it is foaming in the bottle. So it is foamy, but doing it this way keeps it from foaming up. And then we're going to add 1 tablespoon of white vinegar. This gives it a little bit more of the artisan, not quite, but almost sourdough flavor. And it's a flavor that my dad likes a lot. So, and it's all about the 86-year-old father who loves bread. So one of the reasons that this bread recipe, so now I'm just going to mix with a little paddle, or bench. This is a baker's paddle. I'm just going to mix it up by hand. And one of the reasons that this recipe has sort of become a standard is at Christmas time this past year, my dad wanted me to start trying to find a bread recipe that was like his grandmother's bread. And of course, having never tasted his grandmother's bread because she died when I was 5, this was quite the chore to figure out what tasted right in terms of what he liked. Okay, so the dough is starting to come together, but there's still a good bit of flour kind of down on the bottom. So now I go to my fingers, make sure you have clean hands, and I'm basically incorporating, just not doing anything ridiculous, just sort of folding it over and bringing the flour into it. And you'll see now it's starting to be, it's kind of raggedy. They call it a shaggy dough, but it actually is turning into an actual dough. Okay, so we've got, that's what the dough looks like. Now I will shape it a little more, and then it's your choice. Sometimes, some people will go ahead and pull the flour up and kind of incorporate it in a little more from the bottom. Some people will move the bread over into a clean pan. I tend to sort of get what I can in there, and then I just sort of shape it a little bit and take the rest of it off my fingers. That is what we're going to leave sit for 8 to 18 hours. And so when we get the next step, which is to actually shape it, we'll show you what that looks like. It will about double in size in 8 to 10 hours, but if you leave it for closer to the 18, it develops a richer flavor. So it's not as much of a texture thing at that point, it's the flavor. So this is a slow rise, and now we're just going to cover it with plastic wrap. I actually put the plastic wrap on top of the dough to keep it moist. And yeah, I forgot to get the plastic wrap out. Sorry, Viv. And here we go. So we just take that and I just lay it right on top like that. And it will, you know, make it loose so that it rises up, but this keeps the top of the dough moist instead of letting it harden up. All right, that's all for now. We'll come back when we're ready to shape this and get it ready for baking. Hi, this is Susie Miller again with Vivian Shea of Dish Ditty. We're going to do step 2 in our no-knead Dutch oven bread baking process. And step 2 in this, after you've mixed everything, which we did in step 1, you're going to have a lovely dough. This is one that's made with whole wheat, and this has been sitting for about 8 hours. So with whole wheat, it doesn't rise as much. I'll show you another one over here. This is actually one we're experimenting with einkorn flour, which is an ancient grain, so it's actually got a lot more rise, but we're going to start with this one. And a couple things, you're not really kneading it, you're folding it. So what's the difference between kneading and folding? When you're kneading, you're really putting a lot of elbow grease into the whole process. When you're folding, you're really just folding. You do want to put some flour down, like I have a thin coat of flour down on your a wooden board, whatever, or you can use a Silpat if you have a Silpat, one of the silicone things. So this is the dough. I'm just taking it out of its where it was sitting, and I'm going to pat it down with a little bit of the flour, make sure it's got some flour, and then I'm just going to start folding it. So all I'm doing, I'm going to do it 10 times. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. Now, there's 2 different ways you can shape this depending on what you want. If you want a round loaf, which many people do a round loaf when they're doing the Dutch oven, you can take it and just kind of squeeze it under with your hand. So you're just kind of doing a little bit of rolling motion with your hand to make it go underneath. And then you put it down and you just kind of shape it. You're just spinning it in a circle and keeping your hands like this. Okay? So this one we're going to do a round loaf. This is what a round loaf. Now, if I was doing it the other, I'm going to shape it, demonstrate the shaping the other way so that you know how to do that. If I wanted an oblong, what's called in French baking is called a batard, B-A-T-A-R-D. All right, what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to pat it out into an oblong, maybe, you know, sort of, you could think of it as a rectangle. And I'm going to fold it in thirds and pinch it. So first I fold it down into the middle and I press. Here I press really hard. This is called making the spine of the bread. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom part. Put it into the middle. And then I'm going to take the two halves that I've made with this, and now I'm going to pinch those together. Okay. And then if you do that, get a little more flour on the bottom of it, and now you're rolling it kind of like a cigar. Okay, so that's how you make it if you want to actually have it turn into a loaf that is more like a standard loaf. Now, depending on the pot you have, you may be able to do this. The pot that I have for this loaf is actually not cast iron. This one is heavily clad stainless steel. This is another type of pot that you can use for this. But if you look at it, this really isn't going to fit in here. So that's why I'm making it into the round loaf. So I'm going to reshape this now into the round loaf. Poor little guy. He's getting manipulated all over the place. And again, just round him out. And there he is. Okay. Now, with this process, we do put things into the pot, and we're going to cover it up, but we use parchment paper to line the pot. This keeps it clean. It also helps when we take it out. We just line the pot with the parchment paper. But when we take this out, it makes it easy to take out. Your pot's clean. It's very nice. All right, so this just has to sit here. Just put it in there, and we put the lid on it. This is going to sit for another 2 hours. And after 2 hours, then we're going to take it out, take the lid off. We're gonna slash the top. I'll show you a quick and easy way of doing that, and then we're going to put it in the oven. So stay tuned for step 3. Hi, Suzanne Miller and Vivian Shea again with our step-by-step process for our no-knead cast iron or stainless steel bread. So this is the bread we were working on before. This is a whole wheat with a little bit of extra gluten, but it is about double the size of what we had before. It's been sitting for 2 hours inside this pot with the lid on in a warm place without a draft, right? That's all the same stuff you would do with any bread. At this point, we're ready to put it in the oven. So this goes into an oven that is cold, and as soon as we put it in the oven, we're going to take the temperature up to 425 degrees. Then we're going to set the timer for 30 minutes. Because it's going to go in like this with the lid on, and after 30 minutes it's going to have the lid taken off and finish the baking for another 30 minutes without the lid on top. Okay, so now here's another thing you need to do. When bread is baking, it releases steam, and if the steam has nowhere to go, then it just kind of misshapes the bread. So if you want your bread loaf to stay in this lovely round shape, you actually need to go ahead and snip it with either a knife or with your handy dandy scissors. So I actually do this. I snip, and you can do all kinds of things, but this is one of my favorites. It just kind of, it'll just make kind of a crown shape. So I've snipped about 1/2 inch into the dough, and this will then allow the steam to escape. Okay, put the lid back on, and now we take it over to the oven, and we're gonna put it in the oven and then turn the oven on to 425 degrees. We've got that set for 425, and off we go for 30 minutes. Set your timer for 30 minutes. We'll show you what it looks like in 30 minutes when it comes out. See you in a bit. Okay, here we are. It's 30 minutes since we put the bread in the oven. Now we're going to take it out. Be very careful, it's very hot. And take it out, take the lid off. Look at that. So it looks not quite done yet. This will be much browner when it's done. This is whole wheat. But you can tell it's got its structure. And see how these points have lifted away? That's because of the steam. So those are the little points that we did with the scissors. So now this goes back into the oven for another 30 minutes. And then when that timer goes off, we'll go ahead and check the temperature. Make sure that we have the right temperature in the bread to make sure it's done. Okay, talk to you in a bit. Hey, we're in the last step of our bread making process. Before we pull the bread out, I want to highlight something. When we pull the lids off of the bread, they're really hot because they've been in a 425-degree oven for 30 minutes. My signal to the rest of the world that this is a hot lid is I leave a pot holder on the lid so that people kind of get the idea. So that's just a safety tip. You may have another way of doing it in your world, but that's how I do it in mine. All right, so we're gonna take, oh, look at this. Oh, beautiful. So here is our bread, okay? Last step before we say we're done is to check the temperature. So the temperature of the bread, I like it to be 205 to 210 degrees. If it's below 205, I'm gonna throw it in the oven for a few more minutes. Usually I put it in for 5 more. But if it's done, and I usually actually put the thermometer in one of the cuts, so I get but towards the center, and we'll see. I don't know if it shows on the camera. So, all right. $200. Slowing down some. Let's see if we hit 205. All right, so this is at 203. I'm gonna put it in for about 5 more minutes, and then I'll check it again. And typically that I only need 2 degrees. It'll be okay for the next time. But then all I would do after that is take it out, use my mitts, and use the parchment paper, take it out and put it on a cooling rack. Let it cool for at least 30 minutes. I know everybody loves hot bread, but the bread is still cooking in the middle when you pull it out. So you want to let it finish its baking, give it at least 30 minutes, and then you can cut into it if you want warm bread. If you want to just have it ready for storing and sandwiches and things, let it cool for at least an hour. All right, so that's our no-knead bread. I hope you have enjoyed seeing how it's made, and I hope you will make some yourself. Thanks.